create a more competitive, open, level playing field where it wasn't the best connected people who would win, but the most talented.
Welcome everybody to the Scott Ross Show. I'm so honored that you take time to listen to this podcast, and I'm excited about today's episode for you. I'm going to be interviewing a gentleman named Rand Fishkin, who is a really successful guy. He is the founder and CEO of two different technology companies. Back in 2004, he founded Moz, which is a search engine optimization software company, grew that organization to be more than $40 million in revenue, and has recently launched another company called SparkToro. So you're going to learn a lot from him about how to develop authentic entrepreneurial relationships and marketing relationships. He's going to talk about a lot of the success he's had, but more importantly, the mistakes he's made and the things he's learned from those mistakes. For those of you who are more on the feeling side of the personality spectrum and the empathetic side of the personality spectrum, he's going to talk specifically about how that affected him as a leader and the things that he's done to be the best leader he can be as an empathetic person. And then something that I think is going to touch a lot of you is he's going to talk at the end about his struggle with anxiety and depression and some of the techniques that he's used to become healthier in that part of his life as well. So there's a lot here. He's the founder, as I said, of a couple companies. He's also an author of a book called Lost and Founder, a painfully honest field guide to the startup world. Just a ton of insight coming your way. So with that said, let's listen to Rand.
So welcome, Rand, to the Scott Ross Show. I'm so honored to have you with me today and have our audience be able to gain from your incredible insights. Most people aren't going to be familiar with you, so just to share your background and a little bit of your story with the audience.
Sure, absolutely, Scott. First off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I dropped out of college in 2001 and started working with my mom, Jillian, at her small marketing consultancy, just a one-woman operation until I joined. And we got into the web design world. This is back in the early 2000s as everybody was coming online, needing websites. That did not go particularly well. We failed every way you can fail as a small business owner and ended up deeply in debt. But because we had never told my dad that we had any debt and were sort of hiding it from him, we could not declare bankruptcy. We had to find a way to pay it back. A lot of the loans that we had were personal loans, credit card debt, all that kind of stuff. So a thing called SEO dug us out of the hole. I started a blog called SEO Moz, which then became the company Moz. And that blog became very popular in the field of search engine optimization, getting found organically on Google. We, sort of grew that business to a few people and a few $100,000 in consulting revenue. And then we launched a software product in 2007 that really took off. We raised some venture capital. I was made CEO at that time. And for the next 7 years, grew that business from, a few $100,000 to 40 million in revenue, annualized, raised some more rounds of funding. And then I stepped down a couple of years ago and started a new company called SparkToro, which is in the audience intelligence and market research realm. And we actually just launched that product last week. So far, going okay, pretty not auspicious timing. We didn't expect to be launching in the worst economic straits of the last century, but yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. So that is my career. I also am the author of a book called Lost and Founder, which some folks might be familiar with. Did reasonably well in the business book world. And I speak at a lot of conferences and events around the world, with the exception of the last 3 months, obviously.
Obviously, yeah. And I want to get into your book a little bit here, but I want to go back to your dropping out of college and joining your mom. Talk to me about the analysis you did there. I mean, what's the risk reward cost benefit analysis on doing that?
Yes. Well, as you know, young men in their late teens, early 20s are very good at cost benefit analysis, and that's how they make decisions. It's not irrational or emotional. It is entirely based on a logical decision-making process now. No, reality is had a big fight with my dad, who stopped paying for college, and I paid for my own college for a couple of quarters and then dropped out because I felt that it wasn't really worth the money, and I liked working more than I liked going to school. Yeah, that was the reality of it. I don't think I would urge anyone else to follow that path. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs who say, "Oh, but look at your story. You know, it looks so good with, you know, sort of building these companies and having dropped out of school." And yeah, that's fine anecdotally, but when I look, and I'm sure you've looked at the stats, right? The difference between completing a college degree and not having one is night and day, right? Your statistical odds of having, you know, a comfortable life and a life where you're not sort of scraping for every dollar, it is just significantly greater if you complete that degree. So I would recommend to myself not to play those games.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm loving to get your perspective. And, we've had several guests on the show who have had pretty prestigious educations, and they've actually said, I don't know that it helped me that much. I think that it maybe hurt me a little bit as far as being an entrepreneur, because it made me think kind of inside a box or
Yeah.
whatever. So, one thing I know that a lot of the people who are trying to get into the entrepreneurial world now that I talk to and coach, they feel maybe inadequate, like, well, I didn't get the right education. And so I do think it's inspiring for people who hear a story like yours that it is possible, at least
Absolutely.
without the right education, to move into entrepreneurship and leadership.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to be fair too, right? I mean, Scott, I had two advantages. You know, you remember what it was like 20 years ago. Literally, this is what I was doing. I was working as a receptionist at a desk at an arcade, like a gaming arcade, making $4.65 an hour. And with that money, I could pay for my college education. Right? Because the University of Washington, right, a public university where I was going, which was a well-rated school, at the time was about a tenth the price that it is today.
Mm-hmm.
So it was possible to work a barely minimum wage job and pay for school. That is not true anymore. That hasn't been
Right.
true since, the Bush administration sort of changed the rules on declaring bankruptcy for student loans. And I want to be fair also to the fact that, 20 years ago and 40 years ago, economic mobility in the United States was far greater than it is today. So, when you say to people like, hey, if you get a college education, you can do all these things, that statistically speaking just gets less and less true every year. So it's tough times out there, right? I think
Yep.
folks need both the, every advantage they can get on the educational side and also on the creativity side, because this world is getting harder.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, something that also has stood out to me about your background and what I've seen from, just the research that I've done, is that you tend to just put out a lot of content that most people would try to keep kind of behind the veil. You know what I mean? Like SEO, as an example. I mean, this is like witchcraft and sorcery for most people. And, the people who know what they're doing, like you, kind of hold that stuff close to the vest and, maybe charge a premium. You're doing videos and you're putting out content, teaching people, the average Joe, how to master that stuff. I mean, tell me your why is that how you approach things? What's your attitude in doing that?
Yeah. In those early years, I think a lot of that came from my own personal frustration around the fact that the search engines, at the time, right, it wasn't just Google, who's sort of the monopoly dominant player today, but all the search engines were incredibly secretive about how they worked, their practices, what worked and didn't. And not only that, the industry was as well. So in the early, even mid 2000s, you saw a lot of people in the SEO consulting business and in-house SEO game who basically said, hey, my knowledge is my secret sauce, right? That's my competitive advantage. I don't want to share that with anyone. I got plenty of people who said, Rand, you got to stop writing about this stuff.
Mm.
I've got old emails. I'd go to conferences and events and get into rooms, and people would turn to me and be like, I better not see this on that Moz blog of yours. And I really hated that. Culturally speaking, just kind of, I don't know, ethically speaking, I didn't think it was the right thing to do. I thought that the right way was to be transparent. I thought that that would create a more competitive, open, level playing field where it wasn't the best connected people who would win, but the most talented. And that was something that I really wanted to see. And I also found, selfishly, that the more I shared about how SEO worked, the more I was open about it. Yeah, I'd make a few enemies or people who were upset with me, but I would build a huge audience, an audience of people who, loved what I was doing, really appreciated it, wanted to contribute, felt like there was finally a source of knowledge for them. And those are the people, those early blog readers, those were the people who signed up for our software product those first 6 months. They're what made it a big success, right? We had built this audience of perfect customers for the product we launched. And so when we launched, we had this sort of rocket ship success.
Well, it seems like it's in alignment with something else I've heard you talk about, which is the difference between, I guess, transactional marketing and more relational marketing, right? Where you see people as a person that you want to add value to versus just a transaction. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a wonderful way to live your life, right? It'll help you go to sleep at night. It'll help you wake up and look in the mirror in the morning. But it is also a phenomenal business tactic. And especially in a world where you are counting on repeat visits, references, amplification, right? In a world of the internet where social media amplification, web amplification are such big portions of how we get business. Basically, every algorithm on the web that is built to send you traffic is designed to look for whether and what people are saying about you out on the web. And so if those things are positive and there are many mentions of them, you are going to do better in Facebook's organic ranking for their page content, feed content, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Google, YouTube, Reddit, every kind of thing you can think of, Yelp's, ratings. So there's that aspect. And also, I think anyone who's been in the software as a service or recurring revenue business recognizes that it is much harder to acquire a new customer than it is to keep an existing customer as a subscriber, right? So, you subscribe to Netflix. Netflix is going to have a much easier job keeping you happy by delivering good content and putting out new shows, recommending good shows to you based on what you've watched previously, putting the right categories in front of you, all that, right? Versus trying to go out and find another person to subscribe to Netflix. And so that recurring revenue mindset is really about delighting existing customers so that you can keep getting revenue and hopefully recommendations from them.
Definitely. Well, and I can just tell you, it's clear that their strategy is just more cat-oriented content. I mean, we've got, Tiger King, we've got Don't F with Cats. I mean, they're just on a cat roll right now on Netflix. I don't know what the algorithms are saying there, but it's very obvious to me what's going on with Netflix right now.
This could be right. This could be a personalization thing, Scott. Maybe you happen to be very feline affiliated.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is I'm not. I have 3 dogs actually. I'm a dog person, so.
All right, well, we'll have to call up Netflix and tell them their algo's off.
But I totally get the point. I agree with you. I mean, it's really an age-old thing, right? It is way cheaper to keep a customer than to go get a new customer. Cost of sale is very, very high. I don't care what your business is.
Oh, absolutely. And cost of acquisition drops substantially if your references and your word of mouth are excellent.
Right. Exactly. And so now we're doing virtual word of mouth, right? That's really what we're doing. It's like the old, Main Street Square just expanded by, 10 orders of magnitude.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the degree of connectivity, the ease with which we can do research on any company or product we're thinking about buying, and the active amounts of recommendations that come into us on a daily basis are just, no comparison from pre-internet era.
Sure. So in Lost and Founder, you do, it's, this painfully honest, as the subtitle says, approach to the startup world or guide. what would you share? Maybe now you've started two, at least major enterprises. There may be another things along the way. What are maybe the two or three biggest takeaways for the average person who's looking at potentially starting something?
Yeah. Well, let's see. So I think um, it kind of depends what your goals are, but one of the things that I would say is that I think the um, media and press and sort of amplification likely bracket of folks, especially in the technology, web, marketing worlds, tend to bias people towards a certain type of thinking around startups and entrepreneurship that I think is both very unhealthy and very unhelpful. And that is, this sort of classic path of, oh, well, entrepreneurs tend to be young men who drop out of college and then like build these extraordinary businesses that are worth billions of dollars, right? Your classic sort of Zuckerberg story, or Larry and Sergey, Bill Gates, right? Those stories for some reason stick in the consciousness of entrepreneurs, and the reality is totally different. So for Lost and Founder, I did a bunch of research around what does startups actually look like, right? And a few things are absolutely true. One, most businesses, even in the technology world, most startups are started by people over the age of 40, right? Between 40 and 65 is where most of those businesses, and the older you are when you start that business, the more success you have on average, right? So the longer your business tends to last, the better your growth rate, the better your margins, all those kinds of things. It is also the case that the diversity of your founding team is very well correlated with success. You can see a lot of public companies and private companies talking about getting more women and people of color on their boards, more LGBTQ plus folks. And that is both for the reason that it's the right thing to do, and also because that is strongly correlated with greater success, at least in the United States for startups. And so, that is another thing I would urge folks to do. You also, I think you don't need to follow this classic path of raising outside institutional capital. Most people who try and do that are going to fail. And there are a lot of alternative forms of funding, right? Self-funding, friends and family, angel opportunities, Kickstarter, right? Indiegogo, all these crowdfunding opportunities, customer-led funding, even small business administration types of loans. Moz was started initially, right, before we raised venture, it was started on credit cards, right? That was our debt package. And I don't necessarily recommend that, but I am saying, right, that there's a wide range of options to consider. And I worry that too many founders, people who are building companies, focus on how do I raise money from investors as my first goal, rather than, hey, how do I build a business that can get customers who love what we do quickly and affordably? And I think that if you change your goals there, your odds of success go way, way up. I also think there's a, to the second part of what I've learned from my Moz experience versus the SparkToro one, I think that a big part of my frustration around my Moz experience, and, look at technically, when you look at Moz, right, Scott, like if you and I are the two owners of Moz, we're thrilled, right? Because that company is doing, $50+ million in revenue, more than 10-15% of that is profit. It's doing okay even through this pandemic, at least the last few months, right? And we're probably thrilled. We're like, oh man, this thing's pouring off millions of dollars of cash every year. It grows, maybe not as much as we'd want, but it's still growing. That's a great business. But if you've raised money and you have institutional investors who expect 10x returns, even 5x returns, how's Moz going to get to $1 billion over the next few years? That's going to be really, really hard. And as a result, being an owner of that company, I've kind of written off the stock that I hold in it. And I'm sort of like, well, who knows? Maybe someday something will come through, but odds are, probably it's not going to be a venture level success. And so I think that expectation setting early on and building a sort of a model for what your business can become that is more achievable in the early stages is a way better bet, right? Rather than saying, well, we're either going to be $1 billion or we're going to be a failure, or $100 million revenue or a failure. Set yourself up for more realistic, more achievable goals in the early stage, and align yourself with partners, with funding, with customers that can meet that more realistic goal. I think that's a way smarter way to play it, and that's how we're doing it with SparkToro.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the first software company that I co-founded, we were young and didn't have a clue what we were doing. We did a lot of VC, and I mean, I have so many regrets of what I wish someone would have told me, from the deal structures we put together and what that ended up doing in terms of, where we were focusing our attention, how we were being measured wasn't really healthy. Because like you're saying, the expectations from the VCs are different than what your expectation would be if you just tried to start a healthy business and organically grow it and be excited about profitability and those things. So, I have a lot of entrepreneurs who they think, man, if they could go raise money, it'd be the biggest thing ever. And I'm trying to tell them, no, it'd probably be a way bigger thing if you could do it without raising a dime, actually. So I
Yeah,
was
I
going to ask
wish.
you, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wish that the press and the social media world would amplify and congratulate people when they reach profitability the way we amplify and appreciate people when they raise money. That
Yes.
I think that would be a much healthier thing to celebrate.
No question about it. Now, are you doing any VC for SparkToro? I don't know if that's confidential. I was just curious if that was
No,
something.
no, no. So I can send you the blog post, but we did a very unique round of funding. It was angels, individual angel investors, not institutionally structured. So we are an LLC that basically raised 1.3 million from about 36 people, putting in between 25K and 100K each. And our plan is actually, Casey and I, my co-founder, and I have our salaries sort of fixed to a decent but relatively low level for sort of Seattle software engineers, and we can't raise our salaries until we pay back that 1.3 million in dividends, right, in profits from SparkToro. At which point everybody gets to participate pro rata in the profits that the company might generate. Any year that we generate profits, we can choose whether to reinvest that or to pay it out. And of course, if the business sells, investors get the greater of either the money they put in or the amount, their percentage ownership from that sale. So, we have a lot of, because we structured things in that way, we have a ton of flexibility about how we build and grow this thing. And our investors are very aligned with our growth and success, right? If it looks like SparkToro has a lot of growth opportunity and we want to put money into that, our investors can benefit on the backside if and when the company sells. And likewise, if it's a small but profitable business for a long period of time, our investors win again. And so do we, right? So do our employees, so do our customers. Everybody's sort of aligned. And I'm surprised that we had to innovate to build this model. We worked with an attorney here in Seattle who actually is part of Washington's crowdfunding laws.
Hmm.
And yeah, we open sourced those documents. So a number of other entrepreneurs have actually used our SparkToro docs to raise money for their own ventures, which is kind of cool too.
Brilliant. I love the model. I love it a lot.
Thanks.
The reason I'd asked is I was just curious, what you see maybe as unique about what's happening in the VC world today versus what it was looking like when you did Moz.
Yeah. I mean, part of the weird thing is I don't know that it's all that different. I would say over the last 3 months, because of coronavirus and the economic downturn, there's obviously a lot of freezing on investment activity. A bunch of funds are pulling their pulling their funds and waiting to put money into their existing portfolio to help those companies survive, and to hopefully, they want to take advantage of the fact that they can probably put money in at a low rate and own a larger portion of those businesses, which is it doesn't feel totally great. But I think one Slight shift. Well, two maybe. There are certainly a lot more venture funding groups than there were in, say, 2007, even 2012 when we raised our second round. And as a result of that, there's a lot more opportunities, especially in early stages, to raise money. I think money is a little more geographically diverse, doesn't care as much. When I was trying to raise in 09, 2010, 2011, folks were telling me basically, move your company to the Bay Area or we're not interested.
Mm.
That's largely gone away. I think COVID actually will accelerate that because the trends around remote work and so many technology companies going all remote for the long term is going to mean, that's sort of the long-term default. And there's also thanks to, I think, mostly kind of the WeWork deal falling apart and a bunch of those big unicorns looking as ugly as they did, that there's some more, what do I want to say, realism around building a sustainable and profitable model versus exclusively focusing on growth rate above everything else, which I think is a little healthier. I'm not sure that pendulum has swung as far as it should, but it's swinging at least in that direction.
Got it. Now, what do you think? I mean, you've obviously had a lot of successes, but what would you say are maybe the biggest or the couple biggest leadership mistakes you've made that you now know, things you wish you knew beginning and can share with our people?
Gosh, one of the biggest ones is around people, which I think almost everyone would say they learn a ton about people and hiring. And there's a lot of great advice out there. So I won't try and rehash that. I'll say instead that for me, it was a little less around understanding other people and a little more around understanding myself, right? Knowing what I am good at and what I'm not, what brings me energy and what saps it from me. I think self-awareness is a superpower for entrepreneurs and founders and leaders. And if you can recognize in yourself things that bring you energy and sap you of energy, things that make you excited and passionate about your work, and things that drag you down, you will be a better entrepreneur and a happier person, which I think is maybe an even more important goal. For me personally, one of the things I identified very late in my career was that I did not enjoy managing large teams. I'm not even really sure that I love managing people in general. I like working with other people who are, diligent and self-starters and creative and thoughtful. I tend to prioritize smart work over hard work. I don't care how many hours you put in. I don't care when you put them in. I don't need to see you at your desk. You don't need to have a desk. Whatever, that stuff's not important to me. I do not want to run a large company again with hundreds of employees. That is not something that brings me energy or happiness. And sort of on my broader socioeconomic, political sense of the world, I would much rather see lots of smaller companies versus a few big ones. And so I'd much rather participate in building and making successful many small and medium businesses versus helping the big guys get even more of an advantage than they already have. I cheer for underdogs. Tends to be
Amen.
my case. I mean, I'm not like into the New York Jets or anything, but I do like rooting for underdogs generally in the business world. And so, yeah, I'm not SparkToro. Look, I'd love it to be a profitable, fast-growing company, but Casey and I are not really interested in growing to 75, 100, 200 employees. I think if it starts getting to that level, we'll try and find ways to instead make it a more a smaller people organization, but having more reach through automation and technology.
Yeah, got it. Well, I don't know if this is related to what you were talking about in terms of, I agree with you. I mean, understanding yourself, learning yourself is so foundational to success.
Yeah.
You've said that you think that having empathy, being an empath, makes leadership harder. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it makes success easier, but life harder, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So being able to put yourself in the shoes of your customers, your audience's of influence, who sort of do the sharing and attention economy, that is a superpower. That really helps you um, in terms of reach and understanding, right? And being able to build the right things for that audience, being able to build products that are intuitive to use, being able to build a company structure that people want to work in and that attracts the best talent and keeps them on your team, all that kind of stuff. But that empathy, right? That same ability that lets you sort of feel what other people are feeling means that you will also carry the weight of those feelings, right? When your employees tell you that they are disappointed in you or in the business, or that they are struggling in their personal lives, their professional lives, that they um, feel like you've made wrong decisions, right? That hits you much harder if you have that empathy than if you don't. And I think that, there are a number of entrepreneurs who I would say are much less empathetic, much less emotional, much less feeling than I am. And plenty of them are very successful. I don't, I think that most of us from the outside, or those who know him on the inside, right, would say that someone like Mark Zuckerberg, while he is good at predicting behavior, is not good at predicting feelings, or not able to feel the same things that other people feel, right? And you can sort of see in public, he has this strange android-like sensibility that, I think that helps immunize you from a lot of the pain and strife and heartache. So look, it works on both sides, but certainly when you are trying to build products, environments, marketing, storytelling to reach your audience, that stuff can be incredibly valuable.
So I agree with you. I mean, I actually, my struggle is the opposite. So hopefully I'm not an android, but I am more on the task oriented side of the personality spectrum, right?
Oh
And so
yeah,
I've had to develop people skills as a, very much on purpose, because I'm also very introverted by nature. So I'm an introverted, task oriented person. My wife, on the other hand, unbelievably extroverted and unbelievably feeling, and she has a
yeah,
business as well. And what you're saying is exactly right. I mean, when somebody makes a complaint or whatever, if somebody brings a problem, it hits her very, very hard. And
yeah,
I think it makes decisions like letting people go if they're not the right fit and things of that nature. It makes that very, very difficult as well. And some of those are critical to moving a business forward. So my question to
absolutely.
you is, since that is, I, I guarantee you a huge portion of my audience is nodding their head, and they're exactly like you are, a feeling person. What are some tools or techniques that you've developed to maybe augment or overcome that as an issue?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is long-term empathy thinking versus short-term. So meaning, for example, layoffs is a perfect example of this. Uh, when I let someone go early in my career, I felt like it was the end of the world. I felt like it was a failure, right? On my part or on their part or on both our parts. Um, but in fact, the longer I've been around, the more I've come to realize and come to see through experience that that's not true. That in fact, letting someone go from a job that's not the right fit for them, where they're not performing, where you're frustrated or they're frustrated, is in fact a kindness very often. Um, I don't know that that's always the case. I think right now is probably an exceptional time when, if you can possibly hold on to your people, hold on to them, because it's brutal out there. But over the previous sort of what is it, 12-ish years, that really was not true. Many times I would let someone go, I would feel awful about it, and then I'd find that 6 months, a year later, they were happier with a new employer who loved them. making progress in their career that they couldn't have made at my company. Why was I so reticent and so overwhelmed by guilt for letting that person go? That was a good thing that we did together, right? We tried something out. It didn't work. We said goodbye. I think that having that long-term empathy view versus short-term empathy of, gosh, it really sucks to get fired, which it does, right? It feels bad that day. It's going to feel bad for the next few weeks. And then 6 months later, 2 years later, 5 years later, you might look back and say, oh, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. This is very true for human beings. Same thing is applicable with customers and product, right? So if you've built a product structured in a certain way, and someone comes to you and says, I'm very frustrated with this product because it doesn't do the things that I want it to do or doesn't do them in the way that I want it to do, I think that you can take that as critical feedback that you could improve it for them. But there's sort of these buckets of, oh, this is the kind of thing that will improve it for this person and many other people like them who are our right customers that our product is built for, versus, no, wait, we are optimizing toward a customer type or a problem that is not actually in our long-term vision. That's not actually meeting the mission of the company, the mission of the product. Let's rethink that. Maybe we should say, you're right, the product doesn't do those things. Our service doesn't do those things. We would recommend someone else because this is probably not for you. Our goal is this, your goal is this, and that's okay, right? Not every story has to be for every person.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, there's this age-old thing of the customer's always right. And I see the positive to that adage. However, that's not true. There's customers that aren't good fits for your business. And so it is a good idea to kind of help them move along. I recently had an encounter with a software product that I was looking at acquiring for our company. And we were doing a trial. And I was talking to one of the consultants and I was like, I'm really frustrated that, this is so super difficult compared to this other thing. And they're like, actually, when we look at your stack, we're a terrible fit. Let's make sure that you get your trial money back and then let's move you on to somebody else. I was very appreciative of that, actually, of them saying we're not a good fit, instead of me spending 6 months to a year of my life trying to put a square peg in a round hole and realizing we wasted our time on both sides. So.
And more likely than not, in the future, if someone has the stack that's right for that product and they talk to you, you're going to be more likely to recommend that product.
No question.
Right? You say, hey, it wasn't right for me, but I bet for you, this is going to work great because, right? As opposed to, oh, I had a terrible experience, don't use them.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, I see them as having outstanding service level now. I mean, they were very, very, very focused on me getting the result I wanted, even though it was going to mean no money for them, which I think is an extraordinary attitude.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
I want to talk about one last thing before we kind of bring this in for a landing. And I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but I know that you've been a little bit open about your struggles with depression and anxiety. And I won't get into the full story now to waste my audience's time, but I have a connection to that in a big way. And so I was just curious if you could maybe just share, how have you overcome that? And let me say this too. I'm aware of a huge portion of our population that this is a problem that doesn't get talked about. And I know for a fact that we're going to have, tons of listeners who are struggling with that. And they feel like, well, that means I can't succeed. So just maybe, share your experience and how you've overcome your own struggles in that area.
Sure. Absolutely. So I first off want to be clear. I don't know that anxiety and depression and mental health are sort of a hurdle that one overcomes. I think rather it's kind of a force in your life that stays with you, throughout your existence. And there are worse times and better times. But certainly for me, when I was in the darkest periods of my own struggles, I did have that attitude, right? I thought that this was a problem I had to overcome and I was failing. And I think that's a lot of how we culturally talk about entrepreneurship and just about challenges in general, right? There's a problem and winners beat the problem and losers succumb to the problem. And that is just not how not how mental health works at all, right? It's a part of who you are and how you are, and it's just with you, right? So certainly, if we were talking 3 months ago, I would have said to you, yeah, Scott, I haven't had really episodes for several years now, right? And my mental health has been really positive. The last 3 months, look, I think it's true for almost everyone who can feel for other people, right? Is that you read the news, you hear your friends' stories, you have, if you, Geraldine and I, my wife and I have family in Italy who've gotten sick. My wife's family is all from Italy. I lost a cousin in New York to coronavirus. Right? It's just brutal, right? I mean, I think yesterday it was, more deaths than the Vietnam War. Just intense. Like this thing is intense, and of course, it's not just human life; it's also livelihood. And so there have been days for both of us, for my wife and I, over the last 3 months that have just hit really hard, right? Where it's tough to answer our email. It's tough to do anything but sit on the couch, and maybe that's okay, right? We are all human. We are all participating in this scary, scary time. We have our frustrations and our fears and our disappointments, and we have mental health to get through, right? And so it's not something you conquer. I think it's something that you build strength around, right? Like a muscle group, right? I don't go to the gym, but right, if you go to the gym, you have muscle groups that you work out, and you have exercises that you do to build strength and flexibility and mobility. And the same thing is true for your mental health, right? You build sort of preparedness, and that is through primarily the biggest one. Every expert will tell you, and every person who's experienced it will tell you, is sleep, right? In my darkest days, I was always struggling with sleep and insomnia and trying to get enough of it, feeling like I had to work more to compensate for my poor mental health and having that impact my sleep. And so building healthy habits there, healthy habits around exercise, not necessarily going to the gym, but getting, my steps in and heart rate, and worrying about my diet and alcohol consumption and all those kinds of things. Finding habits that brought me happiness. One of the things that I read, this is a number of years ago now, but I read Gretchen Rubin's book. What was that called? About happiness. I think it was The Happiness Project. Yeah, and she did a really nice job. It's a very personal anecdote story, but has a lot of research and data in there as well. And I found that hugely helpful because she talked about developing these habits that brought her happiness. One of the ones that brings me a lot of happiness, hard right now, but trip planning. I love planning vacations for the future, almost as much as going on them, maybe even more. Just, setting those things up is really fulfilling for me, exploring destinations we could go and then imagining what it might be like. And that's really wonderful. I love having people over for dinner and cooking for them. So try to do, obviously I can't do that right now, but normally, I would urge other people to do the same. Invest in sort of that, that muscle building, sleep, exercise, health. Invest in finding a happiness framework for yourself, habits that you stick to, and if you fall down sometimes, that's okay. We all do.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm proud of you for, what the disciplines you've been able to create in your life, and the fact that you're adding so much value to the world, in spite of the struggles that you've encountered.
Thanks, man. Right back at you.
Thank you. So one last question I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. If you could only recommend one book that everyone has to read, what would it be?
Okay. This is my favorite technically business book of the year. It's called No Hard Feelings. I absolutely love it. I think it came out at the end of last year, but just phenomenal. Not just a great, it's a very easy read for a business book, but it is also incredibly powerful. I come back to chapters again and again, to some of the The women who wrote it, Liz Fosslien and Molly West Duffy, do a bunch of illustrations in the book, and sort of cartoons, which they're well known for on the rest of the web too. And I don't know, those ideas really stick in my brain and come out at good time. So definitely recommend No Hard Feelings.
Okay, love it. Well, Rand, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you. I know that you added a ton of value to our listeners, and I'm just grateful for you. How can people, stay connected with you or, follow along with what's going on with SparkToro?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, if you want to give our product a spin, you can just go to sparktoro.com, run some free searches and try it out. And I am most active on Twitter, where I'm at Randfish, but you're also welcome to email me, rand@sparktoro.com.
Great. Well, thank you again for being on the Scott Ross Show. Super appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. Take care.